Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. You know, it's funny how things can change so quickly on the farm. Last year we were talking a lot about drought during the summer, and this spring we've been talking a lot about flooding. Today we're going to cover prevent plant, and if you had to take prevent plant, what you should do with your ground now to get it ready so next year can be your best crop ever.
You're right. What an interesting year. We've got some guys still trying to plant soybeans. We have other guys who are trying to rescue some weeds that are really tough to control and maybe getting a little bit big. We're going to talk about spraying soybeans a little bit later into the season.
Well, I don't want to rescue the weeds. I want to rescue the crop, Darren. And one of those weeds I might have to rescue it from is our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you what that is coming up later in the show. But first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to discuss growing points in plants. There's a big difference between different plants. We're standing in a cornfield right here, and that's completely different than soybeans.
Well, when we look at corn, it's a grass crop, and grass crops have one growing point per plant. So this corn here, if I clipped it off of the ground, Brian, is it going to die or is it going to live? That's the question a lot of people have.
Okay, so this growing point on a corn plant, or really on any grass plant, it's going to be below the ground initially, and it's always wrapped up inside all these leaves and stem and everything else, but it will be above ground level when the corn reaches about 6 to 8 inches tall. What that growing point eventually becomes in the corn plant is the tassel.
Now with broadleaves, it's a totally different thing. Like soybeans, for example, as soon as you see something above ground, what are you looking at? You're looking at the growing points. The first thing that comes out of the ground on a soybean plant are the two halves of the seed, and each one of those has a growing point. So as that soybean plant comes up, if anything happens, maybe you get some hail, maybe you have some wind that's blowing sand particles across the surface of the soil that cut those plants off, or if you have a bug that comes and chews that plant off, if you've broken off the above ground part of the plant, that soybean or that broadleaf plant is dead.
So where those growing points are on a broadleaf plant like soybeans, for example, or sunflowers, is basically at every stem that attaches to the main stem. That's where you're going to find the growing points. So on a soybean plant that, let's say, has 20 leaves on it, you might have 10, 12 growing points on there. And also, when you look real close at the top of the plant, there are usually about 3 growing points that are all tight in that center. So before the soybean plant reaches maximum height, you can count, and every stem that's going to attach to the main stem, plus about 3 more growing points up at the top of the plant, boy, it ends up being a lot of growing points.
Now, we're approaching this, of course, from a desirable plant standpoint where we want to keep these plants alive, and we're kind of talking about, all right, you know, if your plant's going to survive, here's how it works. But when we think about weed control, we're also curious about where those growing points are. Now, Brian and I are talking about annual plants like corn and soybeans, for example, and many of the weeds that we're trying to control in our fields are annuals, and so those growing points are eventually going to be above ground. With perennials, those growing points can also be below ground, which makes them much more difficult to control.
Yeah, so in other words, there's a perennial root system, a big root system down below ground, and those growing points actually can extend way out and put up more plants, maybe 5, 10 feet away from the main plant. So in that particular case, when we start talking about weed control, it's going to take a lot of herbicide because I got to get these growing points here under control and growing points that might be 5 feet away under control. You can see that the dose has to be much higher than what we're dealing with for an annual plant in a lot of cases.
You may be thinking, well, wait a minute, what if I don't want to use a herbicide? What if I just want to go do some tillage? What if I get my hoe out? Or what if I have a tractor and I'm going to do some full-scale tillage through this area?
It doesn't matter if you're doing tillage or you're using herbicide. The point is you've got to get every single growing point under control. It's got to be dead. Otherwise, you're still going to have a plant that's alive. So what happens a lot of time, like with the perennial weeds, let's take Canada thistle, for example. You might go out there with your hoe and you say, oh yeah, I got the growing points. I killed this plant here. But what you don't see is that root system below ground that has some growing points. You needed to get below ground and pull that entire root system out to get every single growing point. Otherwise, you're just going to have more plants popping up later.
Well, growing points are certainly important for everyone to understand if you're trying to to grow.
Oh, wait a second, Darren. You left out one of my favorite things to talk about, and that's Roundup. We talk about Roundup-resistant weeds all the time. If you want to get a complete kill with Roundup, what you have to do is make sure you have a lethal dose in order to kill every growing point going down. So let's take lamb's quarters, for example, one of our favorite weeds to talk about here on Ag PhD. A lot of times what we see is guys use a rate of Roundup that's enough to kill 18 growing points up above, but they miss 2 growing points down below. And what ends up happening is then that plant just branches out and it continues growing. Well, with Roundup, it's not the fact that lamb's quarters is resistant to Roundup, it's just the fact that we needed a stronger dose. And especially when the weather is cool and Roundup works a little slower in the plant, you've got to up that rate as much as you can in order to have a lethal dose to kill every single growing point in order for that lamb's quarters plant to die.
Wow, this got to be a big discussion, didn't it, Brian?
Well, it's fun. I like talking about this growing point thing because it's something that a lot of people don't even think about. And unfortunately, our weed of the week also can have quite a few growing points. Can you identify this week's weed?
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans, an advanced soybean product with tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate. Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans. Extend your control.
Today's Case IH equipment is packed with industry-leading technology, and Titan Machinery has the experts to make it perform to its maximum potential. We have a team of specialists and the entire Titan Machinery network to provide you with the expertise to keep up with today's advanced machines. Whether it be for your Case IH planters, sprayers, or precision farming equipment, our experts have the answers to get the most out of your equipment investment. Maximize your productivity with Titan Machinery. Better solutions.
What's new for 2013? Challenge 2050. Challenge 2050 is a 2-component system consisting of a nutrient and a biological additive. This groundbreaking fertilizer contains mycorrhizal fungi, which provide an extended transport system that allows water and nutrients to be delivered directly into the root. Challenge 2050 can increase yield and efficiency of your standard fertilizer program. Challenge 2050 is the future of fertilizer. Call TJ Technologies or your fertilizer dealer and get Challenge 2050 today.
Speed, strength, and efficiency make Capello corn heads a head above the rest. Built with polymer components that exceed industry standards, Capello corn heads continue to push the boundaries for maximizing grain retention while using less energy. Visit CapelloUSA.com and learn more about Capello's state-of-the-art chopping technology that cuts cleaner, allowing your horsepower to remain where it belongs, with your combine, so you can harvest faster in all weather conditions. Add to that an amazing folding feature, and it's clear to see why Capello is a head above the rest.
Your equipment's ready. The seed's in the barn. You have a strategy to overcome the challenges you'll face, and your crop protection products are pretty well locked in. But maybe you still haven't finalized your fertilizer plans. If not, visit agroliquid.com today. With products formulated for superior nutrient uptake, unsurpassed application flexibility, and proven by years of extensive research, this may be the season to take your yields to the next level using agriculture liquid fertilizers.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
One of the most unfortunate things that's happened here over the last 20 years in agriculture is we have seen a lot of prevent plant acres. So we went from the 1970s and 1980s that were relatively dry around the country to the 1990s, which was one of the wettest decades that we've ever had. And because of that, a lot of farmers either were unable or felt unable to be able to get their crop in timely, so they took something in terms of insurance called prevent plant.
Well, like anything else in life, you really don't want to have to take advantage of insurance. I mean, I've got car insurance in case I'm in a crash. I hope I never use it. Here's the thing, with crop insurance, farmers don't want to use it, but they do want to stay in business next year. And you have to make that choice sometimes where, wow, it just got too late for me. There's no way I could get anything in.
Well, now
I got to stay in business.
Okay, yeah, but let's just talk through that just a little bit more. One of the things that happens here is you reach a certain date and crop insurance says, okay, you need to make a choice now. Are you going to take prevent plant or are you still going to put a crop in? And the reason why we're standing in this field today is this is a field where we could have taken prevent plant several times over the years. We chose not to because I wanted to make sure that we were able to put tile in eventually. And here's what I get worried about. So 1 year taking prevent plant, no big deal, okay? But what I worry about is repeated prevent plant in a certain field, and then you decide, well, now I guess it's time I should invest the money in tile, and then you go to NRCS and they say, well, we're going to call that a wetland because you haven't planted it in 6 out of the last 10 years. So I just wanted to make sure that we were very clear. My farm ground is my farm ground. I am farming it no matter what. We've never taken prevent plant, and sometimes that cost us quite a bit of money to do it. But the reason why we did it is just so I never had to go to NRCS and say, well, you know I took prevent plant, but that's not really a wetland. I could have gotten in there, that kind of thing. We planted it no matter what. So in this field, we had some acres that were planted in July to soybeans several times. Unfortunately, now that we've got it all tiled, we fixed that issue. Now we're planting it considerably earlier every year.
Well, there's just so many things to think about with prevent plant, Brandon, and I'm concerned about this year. You know, what's going to happen with my field this year? Maybe I got fertilizer out there. Now I can't get a crop in. I want to do what I can to protect that so that fertilizer doesn't leach away or wash away or something like that. The other thing I'm thinking about is my soil. What if I got some tillage done? Or what if there's virtually no residue cover on my field because maybe I had soybeans last year and there's not a lot of residue left? I want to protect those soils.
Yes, I get that. But here's the thing. I'm just as focused on next year. I want to make sure that next year is my best crop ever. Because, for example, there's something called fallow syndrome where if you keep that ground black, then next year, let's say you go to corn, you test your soil and you say, oh, I've got plenty of phosphorus out there, yet your corn turns purple early in the season. That's called fallow syndrome. And the reason why that happens is there's mycorrhiza fungi in the soil. And I realize you don't see this stuff, but this is going on in your soil. This is actually happening where these fungi will attach themselves to your plant roots and they will bring in more phosphorus. In a fallow year, a lot of those fungi will die because they don't have things to feed on. So I'm focused on, we got to keep those fungi alive. We have to do what we can to make next year's crop great as well.
Okay, well, there's a couple ways you can do that. Now, you can do, as Brian suggested earlier, hey, I don't care how late it's getting, I'm going to get some crop in. Now, maybe it's not my ideal crop. Maybe it's not corn that I wanted to plant. Maybe I have to go soybeans, or maybe it even gets late enough I can't do soybeans and have to put something like millet out there. That's fine. You can do those things. The other way I look at it is, you know, maybe I'll just plant a cover crop. And if I can put a cover crop out there, there's a number of different ones you can use. Maybe you've got a high moisture situation, so I want to use a cover crop that can use up a lot of that moisture to help dry my ground out for the next crop. Or maybe you say, you know, I really don't have that much moisture. I don't want to use too much up. Well, you can plant a lower moisture use type crop. But I'm focused on the nutrients. I want to catch the nutrients that are out there. Then I want to leave this cover crop out and either burn it down in the fall, or maybe it's an annual crop that's just going to die off at frost on our farm anyway, that I don't have to worry about that. But I at least save those nutrients. I had a root system that was working and pulling in more nutrients for me, perhaps breaking up compaction. You know, there's so many benefits of cover crops. That's one other situation where if you can't get any crop in, maybe cover crop could be your answer too.
I just got a question yesterday. What can I do to leave more nitrogen in the ground next year? And should I put some rye out? And I said, well, rye is going to suck up that nitrogen. That's not your answer. In our own operation, after winter wheat, for example, we'll put soybeans out there combined with turnips or radishes. And the reason why we're doing the turnips and radishes is to bust up compaction down deeper in the ground. Because a lot of times when we're coming off a very wet season, then you've got compaction down there because you've been trying to do some stuff out in the field. That's not real good. We want to bust that compaction up. Also, with the turnips and radishes, they'll go down pretty deep in the ground if you get the right ones. And we want to pull up some nutrients down deep in the ground with a different crop than we're used to raising and make those nutrients available for next year. The soybeans obviously will leave more nitrogen for next year. A lot of guys ask about vetch too, for example, because vetch can leave nitrogen for next year. I don't like to use vetch because that's harder to control next year. I also have to think about weed control. If some of those plants are left next year, how am I going to stop them? So that's why typically in our farm we've just done soybeans and turnips or radishes, but there are a lot of other choices.
Well, I love that you brought up weed control, Brian, because that is a really big concern. If you've got a field that goes unplanted and now all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of weeds out there, you don't want to create a really bad problem for next year.
You don't want a seed bank.
Yeah, you don't want that weed seed blowing around onto your neighbors. You aren't going to be very popular in the area if you've got that kind of issue. So the question is, do I do multiple passes of tillage through the summer, or do I spray it? And
but I mean, this is also where the cover crop can hold down some of those weeds.
Exactly. That's the way I look at it, that a cover crop can help me once it's established. You really do need to do a burn down before you plant that cover crop because, for one, I just don't want to do a lot of tillage out in the field. I'm so concerned about soil erosion. When it gets this late in the season, it can sure turn hot and dry really fast on you, and you don't get enough crop up and you have some issue with wind blowing your soil around. So when I'm looking at weed control, certainly you could do tillage, but for what weed control really costs you now, a lot of these herbicides are so cheap, you can just spend a few dollars, you can get over a lot of acres fast, you can control those weeds and still establish something like a cover crop.
All right, now, if you have to take Prevent Plant, I know it stinks, but here's one of the advantages. You can fix your problem long term. You can get out there and do some tiling this summer and get that work done. You don't have to worry about destroying your cover crop. I mean, you can go tile every 30 feet if you need to. So get that done. And the number one thing I talk to people about with tiling is you've really got to get after this deal, getting your permissions, all your approvals downstream, whatever else you need to do, working with the neighbors. I mean, that's where all the work is with the tiling. It's easy to go throw some tile in the ground, but you've got to do all this work up front. But I would just encourage you, just do whatever you can to get that done. And I realize in your case, maybe tile wouldn't have helped you this year, but most of the time it does. Like the field that we're standing in, if we didn't have tile in this ground, maybe we would have had to take Prevent Plant this year. But I'm fortunate that we put the tile in a few years ago, invested the money, it's really paid off.
Well, I'll say a couple more things. Prevent Plant, you know, it really stinks for your own farm. All you want to do as a farmer is raise a crop, but it also stinks for your community. You know, I think about all the small towns in our state, and what's the biggest businesses in town? Well, it's the farmers and it's the grain elevator. And all of a sudden, if we don't get a crop in, and there are a lot of areas that, you know, are going to get half their crop in or less, well, if you get half the crop in, think about how many less bushels of grain are going to go into town and how many less pickups and tractors are going to be purchased and how much less trucking there is and all that extra help that gets used on the farm. You know, all those things go downhill, and just 1 year like that can really set a state back. We saw it in our state a few years back, in North Dakota a few years back. When we get big time flooding and big time problems that way and we don't get our crop in, it hurts everybody. So there's a lot of decisions that you have to make that are actually bigger than your farm. Yes, I'm very concerned about this field for this year and for next year, but I'm also concerned about my community.
Well, Darren, you talk about decisions. The decision I'm after is, how do I control this week's Weed of the Week? We'll tell you what to do on your farm coming up later in the show.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
You expect a lot from this seed, and as it grows through each stage of development, AgroCulture Liquid Fertilizers is there, feeding your crop exactly what it needs when it needs it. So no matter how you fertilize, no matter when, AgroLiquid efficiently brings all the nutrients your crop needs for a great harvest. From 1 kernel in the ground to 600 on the ear. For better yields and better quality, AgroCulture Liquid Fertilizers.
Upgrade your trailer to electric with the Rolltech electric system from AgriCover. Strong, flexible pivot arms and motor mount rotate and telescope, allowing the roll tube to rise and flex over heaped loads. The positive automatic lock is impossible to back off to control the flow of grain. This integrated system uses one wireless remote to operate up to 10 tarps and hoppers, keeping your driver out of the dust, rain, and harm's way. See the Rolltech system in action at an AgriCover dealer near you.
There are more mouths to feed than ever before. What are farmers doing to meet the challenge? They're using agronomically designed equipment from Case IH. Our Quadtrac technology, soil management, and planting systems are designed to foster a better growing environment that helps farmers maximize yield potential. And our deep understanding of agriculture is preparing them for the challenges ahead. Will you be ready?
I'm ready.
Go to caseih.com to learn more.
We've talked recently about how to control weeds in soybeans post-emerge, especially if you have Roundup resistant weeds. But today we want to talk about really late season weed control in soybeans, a rescue situation. What are we going to do?
Well, okay, you can say, hold on. We aren't even close to the end of the season, and I realize that. There is a lot of time left, but the problem is in just a couple of weeks here, we're going to start seeing a lot of flowers in the northern part of the United States in our soybean fields. And once you've got that reproductive stage started in soybeans, there are quite a few herbicides that you really don't want to be using anymore.
Well, that are off-label even.
Yeah, they aren't going to be labeled, and even if they were labeled, you know, it probably wouldn't be the smartest thing, because if you knock some of those flowers off, you're taking a little bit of your potential yield away. And anytime we're controlling weeds, we're trying to improve our yield potential in the field, not take away from that. So we've got to really be out looking in our soybean fields to see, all right, what do we have that's coming? And you know, the other thing, Brian, is with a lot of these herbicides that we're using now, the weeds can only be 2 or 3 inches tall if we're going to do a good job.
Yeah, but that's the whole thing. Okay, let's say I got 12-inch tall lamb's quarters. What's my best bet?
Well, your best bet is to use something like Harass. That's going to do a nice job on lamb's quarters at 12 inches tall. Good luck, because as we mentioned with growing points earlier in the show, you've got to kill every single growing point all the way down. You've got to have great coverage.
That's right. It's off-label. You're probably not going to do it, but that's your best shot. Okay, let's say I got great big ragweed.
Okay,
giant or common.
Well, with either giant or common ragweed, I like First Rate the best, but what I would do is use First Rate and FlexStar. Both of those products have some activity on either of those 2 ragweed species, and if you're mixing it with some Roundup and Roundup Ready beans, that would be the way to go.
How about velvet leaf? Big velvet leaf, can I get that?
Absolutely you can. Cadet and Resource would both be good options for you. I like the Resource a little bit better when I'm rescuing in corn. In the soybean side, either Cadet or Resource will do a nice job.
All right, and then the #1 Roundup resistant weed around the country is pigweed. I'm talking water hemp or Palmer pigweed. What am I going to do with that when it's 12 inches tall?
It depends on what you've done earlier in the season. If you've already used your FlexStar, if you've already used something like Prefix Down, now you can only use it once. Then you've got to switch to Cobra. So I would use FlexStar if I can, but if I've got great big ones, I'm going to use the high rate of Cobra.
Yep, but let's keep in mind again, you're probably not going to get 100% control. So I wish I had better news for you. That's why Roundup got so popular when it came out with Roundup Ready soybeans, because we don't have great rescue options. I wish we did. So otherwise, I guess you got to get your kids out and start pulling, like Darren and I used to do.
We've certainly done that a lot right here in this field, Brian, actually.
Unfortunately. Well, rescue situations can be difficult on the farm, and we also might have to rescue for our Weed of the Week. We'll tell you how to do it coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
You work to protect your farm's legacy and to keep it going. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our Weed of the Week is field bindweed, otherwise known as creeping Jenny.
You know, you talked about how wonderful Roundup Ready crops were, Brian, a few years back when it was controlling everything. Field bindweed was not one of those weeds. You know, we could go with the highest labeled rate of Roundup, and you may only get 80% control. And it gets back to that growing point discussion, because here we have a perennial weed that can reproduce with rhizomes moving underneath the ground. So you think, I sprayed every plant that's out there, I burned them down great, but then all of a sudden those rhizomes start shooting up new shoots.
Yeah, Roundup has never been good on any of those vine type weeds, morning glory, buckwheat, creeping Jenny. So what are we going to do to control this?
Well, you know, I like 2,4-D, Brian. The old 2,4-D works so nice.
That's not going to work too good in the beans, though.
When we'd see it in the fence line or in grasslands or in the pasture, that kind of thing, that worked nice. In burn down situations, guys like that. They also like dicamba a lot, which can be used in corn, so that's a benefit. Especially I like Status, but you can't get by with the Roundup Ready rate. You have to use a high rate, the full rate of the product, if you're going to do a nice job on bindweed.
Now, if I was out in pastures, I would probably go for something like Toradon. I think that's going to do a better job than 2,4-D, but obviously it costs a little bit more money.
Yeah, in soybeans, here's where the challenge gets to be. In broadleaf crops, it's really tough to kill those vines. You've got to have a nice burn down up front. You could use something like that high rate of Roundup. You could use some Sharpen in there.
I like throwing some metribuzin in.
Yeah, there's a number of things that are good helpers, maybe not perfect on field bindweed.
I've also in corn, by the way, seen Hornet do pretty well over the years. But yeah, we've got more options in corn. Soybeans, it's kind of tough. I guess we're lucky we just don't see field bindweed very often in the soybean crop.
That's all the time we have for our Weed of the Week field bindweed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrac technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
This time of year, drift is a huge concern when you're spraying. We'll talk about ways to protect yourself and your neighbors in today's Iron Talk. When it comes to drift, there are several factors that lead to more potential for physical drift of your spray particles. Wind is the one most people focus on, but other than not spraying on windy days, we really can't control that. Knowing that almost every day has some degree of wind, we still need to manage it. First of all, your spray nozzles make a huge difference, but your choice is either to get great coverage with fine droplets from something like a flat fan tip, or to get great drift control from a tip that makes coarser and larger droplets. Then, you look at where those tips are in relation to the crop. The height of your spray boom makes a huge difference. If your boom is 3 or 4 feet above the crop, you're much more prone to drift. The best recommendation, depending on your tips and spacing, is to have the boom 20 inches above the crop. You still get your full spray pattern, and you are the least exposed to wind. The speed you're running through the field is important as well. The newer self-propelled sprayers with auto steer make running faster that much easier, and if you have lots of acres to cover, I see the temptation of increasing your speed. The guideline here is to never run above 15 miles per hour, and if you could go slower than that, it would be much better. Follow these tips, and spray drift can be managed properly on your farm. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now, back to the show.
Today's number is 3. You can see it everywhere, and it can stand for almost anything. But when it comes to protecting the nitrogen that feeds your crops, 3 is the special number that sets Nutrisphere N, Nitrogen Fertilizer Manager, apart. Because Nutrisphere N is proven to reduce all 3 forms of nitrogen loss, which adds up to keeping more nitrogen and yield where it belongs. So ask for Nutrisphere N, the stabilizer that fights nitrogen loss 3 ways.
Today's Case IH equipment is packed with industry-leading technology, and Titan Machinery has the experts to make it perform to its maximum potential. We have a team of specialists and the entire Titan Machinery network to provide you with the expertise to keep up with today's advanced machines. Whether it be for your Case IH planters, sprayers, or precision farming equipment, our experts have the answers to get the most out of your equipment investment. Maximize your productivity with Titan Machinery. Better solutions.
Looking to maximize yield? Quick Roots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quick Roots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quick Roots is applied to the seeds so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quick Roots today.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but be sure to join us again next time for another Iron Talk, Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, and much more. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
Fertilizer is a term commonly used to describe plant food. Did you realize all growing plants require primary, secondary, and micronutrients in order to grow properly and produce food for humans? For more information, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.